So I don't know. I know you don't really read your comments that much. Maybe you'll read like the first day and you'll like whatever. But I consistently go through my comments. I enjoy interacting with the people who comment on my videos. 99% of the time, it's always a great interaction. But there's always that 1% that makes you scratch your head and go, huh? And something I've been seeing ever since episode 2 is this growing consensus of people. I shouldn't even say people. It's maybe like a couple of less than 10 people. But it's still, you see the numbers growing of people calling the show boring. And so I went on Twitter yesterday and I wrote this. Do you mind if I read it out?
Sure.
I said, I think the most insane thing right now that is plaguing House of the Dragon and this franchise are the quote-unquote new fans I've noticed coming in saying they're bored. I get that as our social media use increases over time, we become less patient. More on that in a minute. But come on. The Game of Thrones / Song of Ice and Fire franchise was always about two characters, sometimes more, in a room talking to each other. The action set pieces, while fun, was never what the series was about ever. The books are even worse about this, so don't even tell me you're a book fan. In fact, if you think about it, when you ask the average Game of Thrones fan when the show started getting bad, they'll tell you every time, Season 5. And that's ironically when we started getting more action scenes and less dialogue. It's normal to have a laid-back and relaxed episode to catch your breath after a big battle, but some of you kind of forgot about that. Now, I want to bring up a very good point this one guy made. I'm trying to find it here because he is so right. Because and I have asked people before, and this was also a conversation in one of your streams a while back of when Game of Thrones started to go downhill. In my opinion, I think Season 5 was great, but a lot of people like to say Season 5 is where you started to see the cracks. I disagree.
No, I would say Season 4 you see the cracks, but Season 4 is still okay, and I would say Season 5 is bad. But that's my opinion. The first three seasons are really solid.
Let me see here. I fucking love this guy. Shout out to this guy. From the top rope, he comes in and he goes, every Zoomer bitching about House of the Dragon Season 2 being boring wouldn't have survived Game of Thrones Season 2. Jon spending half of the season aimlessly walking around with Ygritte, Dany doing fuck all in Karth, Robb and Talisa sappy romance, House of the Dragon Season 2 looks like a thriller in comparison. It's hilarious when people think of the second season, they only remember Tyrion and King's Landing, the Arya Tywin scenes, and the Battle of the Blackwater. The reason being because everything else was painfully boring. I don't think everything else was painfully boring. I don't, but he has a point about like the former. He does have a point about that.
Right. Well, earlier you brought up this tweet to me, and I was like, and I think my response was, I thought the joke about Game of Thrones was it was two people walking in gardens, like, and you're like, the South Park thing too, like walk with me, Kenny, and it's like, like that, and that was and that's what we loved about it. It's just like, ooh, two people walking in a garden and scheming about the Game of Thrones, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the show is Game of Thrones, not Fight for Thrones, right? Or Battle for the Thrones. It's the game, right? Which is like the politicking. The non-violent part is actually like the plot, right? I mean, this is
why I say quote unquote fans, because you can't fucking sit there and tell me you're a fan of this franchise when all of the franchise's best moments have always been those two people in a room. Like, for example, for those of you who know me, get ready to groan and roll your eyes. I'm going to mention that one scene again from Season 1. Robert and Cersei, and then Season 2. Tywin and Arya. Preston's favorite was Theon and Maester Luwin. Season 3. Jaime and Brienne. Yeah. Season 4, Oberyn and Tyrion. It's always the Season 5, Jon and Maester Aemon.
Yeah. And how about this, Carmine? Uh-huh. I know your favorite character. Who's your favorite character?
Littlefinger.
How many battles was Littlefinger in?
Oh, exactly. Chaos is a ladder. Come on, my dude. That was just a conversation between Littlefinger and Varys. Come on.
Right.
Like, you can't tell me you're a fan of this franchise when it's like telling me, I was telling you this earlier, it's like telling me you like Pokemon, but you don't like interacting with the Pokemon or catching them. Bro, that's the whole series! How can you sit there and tell me you're fighting any of this? And this is started with episode 2. People saying
this episode has too much Pokedex in it. Man, there's too much explaining what the Pokemon do.
It's getting to the point where it's like, really? And I'm like, I don't want to make this a generational thing, but there's been studies done about this, and I remember this specifically, reading this study and going, you know what? Shit, that's me. There's a study done that us being on our phones and computers all the time has made us impatient, because entertainment now is everything is ready right now. TikTok is usually like a bunch of videos that are like less than a minute, and it's one of the most popular platforms on the internet. YouTube Shorts, incredibly popular, because it's like less than 59 seconds. I get that you guys are losing your patience over time, but come on.
Oh yeah, I mean, like honestly, like a presidential candidate was nearly assassinated, and like right now, Carmine and I are recording. It's Tuesday. Like everyone's forgotten about it. It's like it's Tuesday. Like yeah, that happened on Saturday. Like oh my god, like what's wrong with this?
Oh my god! And like, look, I'm not trying to, because the previous guy said the Zoomers, the Gen Zers, and Gen Zers are becoming adults now. When Game of Thrones was airing, Gen Zs, they were kids, and so on and so forth. Gen Zs are the first generation to be constantly online. So as a millennial, I've noticed myself being impatient when I'm reading an article. I just want to get to the end. I want the too long, didn't read. Sometimes when I'm on Reddit and I'm like reading like something someone said, I always scroll down for the too long, didn't read, because I myself am getting impatient as I spend a lot of my time on these devices. And I feel like for the Zoomers coming up, and even Gen Alpha, it's going to be even worse. But guys, this is what this series has always been about. You can't sit there and tell me you're a fan of this when this is always what it's always been. Yeah. You just can't tell me that. And I know some people are going to say, well, I want to read this one guy here. I hope you don't mind, Silvino, because he's out of his mind. He is. I brought him up earlier to you, but I didn't read the whole tweet. Let me read it real quick now. Dan and Dave, which by the way, automatically fuck you for not starting Dave and Dan, but whatever. Dan and Dave understood how to make good fun.
It wasn't Dan and Dave. Dan and Dave was the decathlete thing back in the day. Dave and Dan are Game of Thrones. I don't know if you know, but there was a Dan and Dave before Dave and Dan.
I did not know this. I don't think anyone did either. I think you're the only person with this knowledge.
No. Like, first of all, like, there's a Wikipedia article on it. Dan and Dave. You can wiki it. It was a merchandising campaign by Reebok, and it was like this was the big thing is that like one of them didn't actually even qualify, but it was like two Americans trying to qualify for the decathlon who were going to compete, and they're both in the ads. But yeah, so like when you say like when Dave and Dan came around, I was like, I constantly think of Dan and Dave. But yeah,
I just want you to know I love you. I just want you to know I love how you stop everything just to give us that history lesson.
I got to tell you about Dan and Dave and those Reebok commercials.
I love you. I just regardless. Dan and Dave, this is what the guy said. Dan and Dave understood how to make good/fun TV, and they simply understood what won't work from A Song of Ice and Fire. That sentence is fucking true. And you and I, for those of you who don't know, on Patreon, we're doing a rewatch of the first season of Game of Thrones. And you and I were both saying how Dave and Dan did a very good job, specifically with Daenerys' wedding night, where in the books, it was kind of weird that this incredibly young girl was more than willing to shack up with Khal Drogo. But in the show, I think they played it better, where she's very clearly not comfortable, she's not having a good time. This is a far cry from what she wants to be doing right now. And I think and you and I both agree, Dave and Dan was just good. So he's right on this. The next sentence, however, is where he shits his pants. He goes on to say, House of the Dragon has no soul to it, and it's still writing the coattails of what Game of Thrones was doing. The characters are painfully boring on screen, and so are the motives behind them. Buddy, of course it's writing the coattails. It's a fucking prequel. What are we talking about here?
Yeah. Empire Strikes Back is writing the coattails of Star Wars, man.
And look, I will say this. You guys would have fair criticism here if we're talking about Season 1, because in Season 1, we only ever really focused on the 4 characters that were consistent. It's Alicent, Rhaenyra, Viserys, and Daemon. Everybody else, when you thought you were getting to know them, they kind of skip an episode, or like the time skip happens so so often that you almost can't even get used to them.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
that's fair criticism for season 1. But season 2, episode 1 fixed that immediately. We only had one episode with adult Aegon. Actually, no, I'm sorry, 2 episodes with adult Aegon and adult Aemon. And we barely got to know them other than Aegon being a piece of shit of an asshole. And then in season 2, episode 1, you got to know him a little bit better. He's actually kind of a chill guy. So
Yeah, he's nuanced.
He's nuanced and still a horrible person, but there's more there. Season 2, episode 1 fixed that completely. If you actually just put down your phone and not, like, pay attention to the screen whenever you hear a dragon roaring, you would know that. And,
Yeah.
I find it baffling.
Yeah, so yeah, and I haven't say like my wife doesn't have like patience for movies, and she's like on her phone while watching movies. Like I understand that there's just like different generation on how media is consumed, and what you want. Sometimes people just want the information. A lot of times my wife is like, I can't be bothered to watch a movie, and she'll read the summary on Wikipedia of the movie,
Jesus.
so she knows about it, and then she can talk about it, and then she doesn't have to see it. And it's like, great. I mean, that's fine for like understanding cultural zeitgeist and stuff like that. Like some things, maybe you don't have time for War and Peace, and you can just read a summary of it. Fine, I understand it to some degree, but also like the entire point of art is to observe it, absorb it, understand the human condition from it. So being bored is also part of the human condition, so sometimes you're supposed to be bored. That's another thing.